Our tutor today is Finn Campbell-Notman, who entered Landscape Artist of the Year in 2022. He won his heat with his depiction of Blackpool Beach.
He made very good decisions early on and then really made us think, that's an artist who wants to tell stories, and it's an artist we're really interested in.
At the Thames Barrier for the semi-final, Finn once again produced a painting rich with narrative.
My goodness, I'm way off on my journey down the estuary on that wonderful boat. It's beautifully put together, so that just takes me off away to another land.
In the Welsh village of Portmeirion, he was declared Landscape Artist of the Year.
Finn Campbell-Notman.
His £10,000 prize commission for Royal Museums Greenwich was a seascape inspired by 17th century Dutch maritime artists, the Van de Velders.
That's good. Well done. Thank you, Lawrence.
In Finn's evocative landscapes, composition is key.
I think if you get the bones of a painting correct, then you can start to push and pull.
Which is why he is perfectly suited to leading today's masterclass, composition in landscapes.
Today, I'm going to be showing you how I approach composing an English landscape in a very classic way to depict a very romantic English country scene. This composition is of somewhere that's very local to me. It's called Duncliffe Wood. I've been numerous times. It's a cloudy day, but it's a bright autumn day. We've just been for a long walk. And so the scene, how I've constructed it, is sort of like a memory. Because I've been there several times, I recall different aspects of the landscape, and I wanted to get all of that into one picture. You can see that from my Photoshop file, which is how I compose from various photographs, I've spent quite a lot of time putting together this composition from maybe up to 20 photographs. And then once I've got everything as I want it, I then put a grid over this file, and then I transfer it onto the canvas on a 10-centimeter square. So to begin with, a bit of raw umber, quite thin. And this tree on the left, we're just going to very loosely, we don't have to be accurate, we just want to kind of get the lines in. In terms of composition, this is a device that I've used sometimes, particularly with landscape, and this goes back to very classical composition within landscape. We kind of like to frame the view, and what that does, it sort of contains our peripheral vision. So when we look out onto the world, we're looking with our eyes, obviously, but on a canvas, we have four corners. And that defines what we're looking at. This tree and these darker trees that I'll put in a moment, they're performing the same function. They're sort of concentrating our view into the composition. So rather than looking at a painting, we're going to be looking into a landscape. Generally, when we have a rectangular canvas, we divide it into three parts. That's both vertically and horizontally. We tend to want to focus on one element, and all of the rest of the elements sort of are in support of that. So here, this clump of trees, you can see that, and obviously I'll come back and make them a little bit more refined later, but we're just sort of getting a feel of where things are within the frame. You can see that this is roughly, so if we take that measurement for the short side, it forms a square roughly there, and that's 1/3. The same goes for this side, and so our focus is occurring on the third horizontally, but it's also occurring roughly on the third vertically. So there's this intersection right here is where I wanted the focus to be. Now, obviously there are three other intersections, and I'll show you why I've put the tree on the right with these branches coming in. Again, this is very rough when we come back and refine it later. But this branch form, I've actually edited and altered the branches so that they do what I want them to do in terms of the composition. All of this form here, once I fill it in, is going to be occurring on the vertical and on the horizontal third. And another element of composition is that we have what's called a Rembrandt triangle. It's elements which contain the way the eye travels around the painting when it looks at it. So we have, if you see, 1, 2, 3 that are forming a triangle here. And in that triangle, in that negative space, our eye travels into the painting and into the distance, because we want the viewer to look into the painting and into the landscape rather than at the surface of the painting. So I'm going to dash in all of these elements very loosely, because we just want to see those shapes. Now, obviously these trees are going to be green at some point, but I'm using very thinned raw umber because it's the fastest drying pigment. And when it's very thin, we can make these marks and we don't have to worry about the drying time, because it will dry very fast. We can then work over it fairly soon afterwards. I use photo editing. I'm more of a studio painter, but it doesn't mean that I don't spend a lot of time outside. I do. I use my phone, I take a lot of photographs, and then it's a lot of editing, going through photographs, finding bits. Sometimes when I'm composing, there'll be an element that I kind of think that the picture needs. And so I have this store of tens of thousands of photographs, and I can go back and I can find, oh yeah, that day, that tree, and I can put it into the composition to see if it works. A lot of people, part of their painting process is really to be outside. So if you are a plein air painter, then you're kind of doing the editing and the composition parts that I will do back in the studio on a photo editing program. So now I've got the sort of an indication of the large areas of mass and the focal point. I'm now going to go in and do sort of the secondary parts of the composition, which is this very sort of geometric, linear set of receding fields. One of the elements of composition is line, and how these head shapes are going to lead the eye in from left to right. And once we get a little bit further, we've got some indications of sort of a curve that comes in back from right to left. So the lines are keeping our eye circulating within the composition. So I spend quite a lot of time composing, and, you know, this reference may have taken me up to a week to make. Once I have the grid, I draw the grid onto the canvas, and that will take maybe 3 or 4 hours. And I do that because, in a very simple way, it allows me just to get on with the painting. I'm just trying to capture what I felt on the day, and all of these ways of working help me to do that. So after putting in these more structural elements, we can sort of see the skeleton of the piece, if you like, the bones of it. Instinctively, you want to move, or at least I do, I want to move to seeing some of the larger sort of masses in the negative space between these positive masses of the darker trees. So I'm just dashing in the blue of the sky. And what you'll see is that because I've got the warm ground on the canvas, it all looks very closely toned. And at this stage, we're not really worried about getting the paint colors right or the tonal values absolutely correct. Just very quickly getting an idea of some of the main elements of the sky. I'm not entirely certain if these little branches coming in are entirely necessary. I'm just going to quickly put them in because I do feel like they helped just reinforce that, forcing the eye into the picture, because there are so many elements that are diagonal from left to right. Unless we have an element that sort of reinforces the eye traveling back from right to left, then the eye might wander off the side of the right hand of the canvas. So I'm just going to put these in. And hopefully you'll see how actually they really work, because what they're doing is they're echoing these more kind of graphic linear elements. So this is very nice. We can see these curves here are echoed by these curves here. They're then complemented by the curves in the landscape, this one coming up around here. So we're getting some very nice movement all the way through. In this composition, we're going to have quite an intense green on this field, but that's the only area where it's going to be that intense in terms of the saturation of the color. All of the rest, and this is again a compositional element, I want to tone it back. So we can use color and tonality, whether things are dark and light, to reinforce elements of the composition. Now, the English landscape in particular, it's almost a composition in and of itself, because apart from a few pockets here and there, it's a very constructed and managed landscape and has been for thousands of years, or at least since the Saxons. So all of these hedgerows, all of these elements that we're so incredibly familiar with, have actually been put there in a sort of planned way. So as a landscape painter, acknowledging that and using them within our own painting, we're sort of making a composition upon a composition. I'm just going to begin to put the clouds in. I'm going to, as usual, work from dark to light, so I'm going to put in the shadows first, just to get a sense of where these shapes are occurring. That looks a little bit dark, but it doesn't matter. We're just trying to get a sense of where we are. And switch to a big soft brush. Just get these in, just to get the idea of where the light is hitting these clouds. Now, it may not look like much at the moment, but just by putting that in, we can see that two of the main elements of this composition are this very sort of intense dark here and this very diffuse light there. And that sort of juxtaposition between the two is a key to the focus of the painting. These fields are really key to giving us a sense of where we are. We're in a very classic English landscape here, and so we're going to have to get our greens looking really good. So we've got the clouds here, and the direction of the light from the sun is from top left, and it's a cloudy day, so we're getting these nice bright patches between the clouds shining on the fields. And so with the shapes of the hedges and these green shapes, we're kind of showing the kind of day that it is. And these look incredibly acid bright, and of course, as we go on, I'll adjust the tonality and color. Now I've put some of these greens in, I'm going to go back into the hedge lines and the trees, some of the very much darker elements. So just using a very large brush to kind of rough these in very loosely, not worrying about the brushwork at this stage. We're just putting in areas using a much darker version of the greens I used below, and just dashing these sort of leaf shapes. I'm a realistic painter, I'm not an impressionist, but at this stage of every painting, I'm just getting an idea of what things are and where they are. I'm now using sort of correct colours, so the greens that I use, I've found a French manufacturer makes this colour called sepia, or sepia. It's somewhere between a brown and a green, and it's actually made from squid ink, so when you put it on the palette, it smells of seafood. But it is such a nice warm green, so I think what I should do now is a little bit of sort of painting by numbers, just getting all of the ground covered so that we don't have any of it showing through. I'm really quite happy with how this is sort of come to some measure of resolution because I have the structure so well. I've been very loose with my brush strokes. However, that sort of leads me into another element of composition which we can use, both through the shapes, the interchange, the various elements of composition, the rhythm, the lines, to reinforce that sense of sort of sparkle and vivacity. We can work back into these trees and these grasses using sort of fairly directional brush strokes. So I know these are oak trees. It doesn't really matter because this sort of rhythmic brush stroke is just sort of another layer building upon the sort of framework, then the larger elements. And again, this directional brush stroke is reinforcing our attention down onto the focus of the picture, which is this otherwise fairly inconsequential clump of trees. Now, traditionally, what we would have in this composition is a shepherd, roughly about here, and maybe some indication of sheep or cattle. But I'm not particularly interested in composition in that way, and so the figure within this landscape is this clump of trees. It has a personality. And so having this element here, and again, I will pay quite a lot of attention to this to make sure that as our focus within the painting, it really works as our representative in the landscape. Time for clouds and the sky. So overall, I'm really quite happy with how this is now beginning to work. I've dashed in the sky very, very loosely. The brushwork of the foreground is also very loose. But I can, with an overall sense, now I can begin to see which parts of it need attention. Personally, to my taste, this area right here feels a little bit brassy and a bit oversaturated and bright. However, it may be that the sky needs to darken. So those sorts of adjustments, you know, once I've got the composition fully on the canvas, then you can begin to move forward and refine things and just make it feel a bit more naturalistic. As a composition, very happy with it. As a finished painting, obviously it needs a lot more work, but I have achieved really what I wanted to, which was to show you through the demonstration of the elements of composition how we can express that interface between what the landscape gives to us and what we bring to the landscape. A good painting is, quite often it's the equilibrium between those two poles of what you bring to the landscape and what the landscape says to you. Hope you found this helpful and enjoyable as much as I found it enjoyable. Good luck with your painting.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv.